We're recording. It's official now. We can't say anything bad about anybody that we know. It's on
Oh
record
no,
from this point onwards.
it's a shame. We're just chatting about X, and yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Your name was probably mentioned, but unfortunately, it's not in the recording. Oh well.
yeah,
Anyway, yeah. So we're recording this conversation because Ivan and I talks like quite regularly now as part of the community build mode that we're both in, and we have such good conversations. And it kind of feels a bit of a shame, definitely from my side. I don't know about you. That at the end of these great conversations, I'm like, there's no record of that. Even just for me alone, actually, just to go back to or summarize or something. So fine, we're recording it, and if anyone wants to watch it, they can do.
exactly. Yeah, share with the people what we're working on, what's in our headspace, and maybe we can find, I guess, similar-minded people, and we can open the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people out there that think about these things, and I don't know. I don't see much media out there actually that provides like this long form thing. You get these like big podcasts, like maybe Lex is a good example. Usually quite an
Mhm.
academic topic. Guess like what was the DHH one, like 7 hours long, and
Yeah,
maybe that is too long form. But I think like these long form conversations are really great because you can get into topics like when it's just an exchange on X or when it's like a soundbite or even just a really short video. I don't know. There's just not enough room to get into any topic that's like interesting for me. So yeah, this is good.
yeah, but at the same time, it's the media has made it that way, right? You have all these attention spans that have been shortening over a period of time. My wife, she's like, I've been broken. I'm ruined. I cannot like consciously watch a movie because I cannot hold my attention for that long on a single thing.
I mean, yeah, it's like you watch a movie and you're like, okay, if this is 90 minutes or whatever, that's 185-minute segments that could have been spent doing 180 things. Like that is a
Yeah,
weird mindset. But even I find myself drawn into this sometimes.
yeah.
But then I don't know. You have a really long conversation with someone and get into the details, and you're like, this is quite rare. So I also really value the long form stuff.
Oh no, I'm all for long form. I think short bites are maybe just to get you interested in something or educate you about something very, very particular. But the true learning comes from like kind of getting deep into things and exploring different aspects of it, which you can do in sound bites. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Where you've got enough time to explore the subject to the point where you find maybe disagreement or different viewpoints and you can really get into them. You definitely can't do that in like a little exchange. And also it's impersonal as well. Like I think a lot of the exchanges on X tend to be like people are really either really well behaved or really badly behaved, but depending on what their goal is. But I don't see very much like honest debate because I think that's really hard. I think there has to be a certain amount of like respect for each other to do that well, and also just aligned on like what the point is. Like if the point's to find consensus, then you can have a good debate. But if the point is to like win an argument or seem like you've gained power one way or the other, then it never works.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic because uh, I mean, we care so much about being right because being right means you're signaling that you're competent and it's a strong signal. Basically, this person is actually on authority on a given topic because they're always right. And so it's almost never people almost never go like, oh yeah, I was wrong. They're like, oh, I was right about all these like small bits, but yeah, I was wrong about the this other bit that I was wrong about. It's like, no, you just kind of admit it. You were wrong. Your train of
Yeah.
thought led you to this outcome, which was the wrong outcome. You might have considered and said a few right things, but ultimately your worldview was wrong. So, yeah,
I have so many thoughts on this topic. I think it's where do you even start? First, it's a massive green flag when you see someone in public where their reputation maybe is attached to it, or you would think that most people do think that way, and that nevertheless they're willing to be stupid. And in particular, in this context, they're willing to say, "Yeah, you're right, and I was wrong about that," and almost be like thankful for it because it was an opportunity to learn something. Because yeah, I don't know, we all act, or at times we fall into this pattern of acting like we want to be right in public, but in private, you're never right. Well, not never, but
yeah,
infrequently. And because you shouldn't be right frequently if at the same time you think you're trying to do cool new things, because how can those two things be true? How can you always be doing cool new things and always be right? Like if it's new, it's probably unexplored to some degree. First of all, is there even a concept of right there? But at
yeah.
least your hypothesis, if all your hypotheses are right, you're probably just doing something you already know how to do in that field. So But yeah, when people can say, I'm wrong about that, or that's a good point, or concede a point, even the word concede's wrong. It's like, it's not a game. You're not losing a goal against you or something, to use that metaphor, if you're wrong about something. But yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of people don't engage with that goal to learn, actually. Like you say, they engage to. There's a great book by Derek Sivers. I think we've probably talked about this at some point. I think
Yeah.
Ivan and I have probably talked about every subject already anyway. But I'll mention it again for anyone that might listen to this, because it's a cool book. It's a very short book. I like the fact he writes books that are like 100 pages and not 300 pages. And it's called
Yeah.
Useful, Not True. And it's a really, not to ruin the ending. It's not like a novel or anything. But the point he makes there is that most people seek truth to argue it. Most people want to know what's right and what's true and what's untrue, so that they can be right in
Yeah.
an argument about what's true and untrue. They don't need to, like, everything else is belief. And he makes the point in the book that actually the smart person picks the beliefs that work for them. Not, it doesn't matter if they're true or not. Like, for example, indie hackers, right? What are the
Yeah.
statistics that you're actually going to make it?
What,
Like, they're tiny, right?
99%? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like 1%. Yeah, usually.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's against you, and yet you act every single day publicly, and you convince yourself, and you put the time into the work for like sometimes years on end, believing that you'll make it. Well, that's a belief that is untrue. If you talk about truth, if you're trying to find this binary, is it true that I'll make it, or is it false? Well, 99% chance is false. Like, if you told me I was going to have a 99% chance of being hit by a car if I crossed this road, probably wouldn't cross the road. Yet
Yeah.
in the indie hacking space, you're like, and it's probably less than 1%. So again, like for me, it's just a really cool thing to think about. It's like useful, not true. I just use that as like a mnemonic in my head sometimes, of like, is this belief useful to me? Because even if it's untrue, it's not really probably important to me whether it's true or not. It's like, what action
Yeah.
does it create, and does that align me with something that I actually value?
I feel like a lot of people have actually supported this kind of narrative and idea because uh, statistics also shows that people who are foreign to an industry are actually much more likely to disrupt it, because you don't come in with all of your learnings. Like, you don't know the industry, you don't know what is possible, right? And so you go in with this naive mindset that I'm going to solve this, I'm going to change it this way. And this is maybe something that you wouldn't even think or consider because it goes against what the industry believes to be true. And so, yeah, like it's really important to sometimes be a little bit detached from reality. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's a
So,
great point. I think what do they call it? Beginner's mind. You know, if in software engineering, it's been a thing forever, hasn't it? Of like, the beginner doesn't know a lot of stuff, and you wouldn't put them in charge of a whole project because there's so many things that just wouldn't be done that should be done.
mhm.
Well, should depends on what should means, but you know, generally speaking, you can generalize some stuff. Like, probably want version control, probably want some form of like regression testing. Whatever, to what degree depends, but a beginner might not do any of those things because they just don't know that's how you go about it. But they'll
Yeah.
approach the problem with it. They can't approach the problem with the same mindset you've got, and sometimes that reveals like a whole different path that you just never think of before. So yeah, it's true. I think the dilemma is, for me, how do you try and like convey a beginner mindset in your own mind? Like, how do you? Maybe it's impossible. Like, maybe you can't actually ever do that. But you can at least encourage yourself to think out of the box and just like chase ideas that maybe that's the heuristic. I mean, looking at it and saying, would I say no to this out of some form of principle that I've learned? And if I would say no, then maybe if just for a second, maybe I should just say yes instead and see where it goes. But then it's difficult because a lot of that intuition is there for a good reason. And, you know, chasing rabbits usually just ends up being chasing a rabbit nowhere.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wonder if AI can actually help that. Like, consciously turn off the part of the network that is aware of how this industry works or how this thing works, and then ask it to come up with creative solutions. And then to be like, hopefully drawing from other tangential kind of concepts to come up with a solution for this industry. Um, but
That's a good point.
yeah,
Yeah. Do you ever play with those parameters to try and make models a little bit more unpredictable, because you make a really good point there, is like most models are going to go down like the neural pathway that you activate, and you're going to ask something that's fairly standard, I suppose, in the way you ask, and the thing that it's trained on is fairly standard. The thing you probably want standard, but then in those little elements of like where you want true creativity, something novel, like AI by definition is not coded for novel, it's coded for the common case. But it doesn't mean it can't find novel, because by definition, what's not in the common case must be somewhat more novel. So you can, I guess, get it to go there by changing like temperature and the top P and so what's it called, top K, top P settings. Do you ever do that?
Yeah,
And have you ever got any good results from doing it?
I have tried several times. Good results means I was measuring it and I wasn't measuring it. I was just trying to have a conversation and having it um, kind of spell out its thoughts and frame it as we're kind of talking about an alternate reality, alternate world, did kind of give me some interesting ideas that I could maybe follow up with. Okay, now back into our reality. Let's dissect this a little bit. But yeah, I that's what I've tried. I haven't really measured it. Yeah,
Yeah. You could probably do that to a large degree just by the right kind of context engineering, I suppose, by intentionally making it do strange things. I've seen some crazy examples where people like, invent a new language, for example, clearly something it's never seen in its data set, and then ask it to
yeah,
use the new language. It's usually some trivial thing, but it can do it though. So I don't, as maybe my simplification is not quite true. It's like, it's not just simply a data set that's statistically being selected based on commonality. There's more going on than that, but yeah, it's interesting. I feel like real innovation, like the next AI model won't be made by this AI model. Like true
yeah.
innovation is going to require like actual research and humans making like, new breakthroughs that don't necessarily come from AI. But yeah,
And
it's a fascinating topic.
yeah, AI is the kind of the thing that keeps on giving. If you're looking for a topic to discuss, it's like the thing that you can just talk about for forever. Um, the I'm one of those people that is an optimist when it comes to AI. I'm like a techno optimist. Now that being said, I'm also aware that where we're heading with AI is very much not going to be an obvious utopia for a while. Um, and I also truly believe that all these CEOs that are out there talking about, oh, we're going to solve cancer, we're going to solve this and that, they kind of underplay the impact that AI is going to have. And yeah, so socially things are going to change so much. Like um, the, yeah, I feel like the fabric of society is going to get undone a little bit when we see robots and AI become more mainstream. Um, and for those of people out there who think robots are not going to be a thing, they are. They are,
Yeah, I
and
think that's it.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're not far into the future. Like they're really close to being a thing.
Yeah, we see the videos of them running into mirrors, but
Yeah,
it's like going back to the early like large language models that were pretty disappointing. That leap from there to the other thing was big, and I feel like that was probably more of a leap, required more effort than getting the robotics right. You know, it's interesting, this topic, because you mentioned the fabric of society changing, and I think that's been happening already. Right, it's actually crazy to me to think back to like, because I think we both grew up around the same time on the internet, right? And it was a different time. Like you would dial to the
yeah,
internet, for God's sake. You would use your
yes,
phone, use your telephone to get you onto the internet. Well, I suppose we still do that now via tethering, but it doesn't quite make the same noises, and it has a lot more bandwidth.
yeah,
But yeah, I remember like back then, the amount of commercialization on the internet was basically like non-existent.
yeah.
It's just wild to think how much has changed. But there's this great interview with David Bowie, the singer,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
he's not the guy's not a technologist in any way, but I think a lot of artists like observe the world, don't they? That's what art's really good at, is some kind of interpretation of the world. So maybe that's
yeah,
why he was positioned so well to say what he said. And I think he was asked something like, what, this was like 1998, I think, or 9. It was like really early internet. The internet had existed for a bit by then, but it was not in the same form as even 10 years later, and certainly not now. I
yeah.
would love to know what he would have said about it now. But he said like the question asked to him was, what's going to happen? What's the internet going to, do? And he was kind of like quite negative about it and said something along the lines of, it'll create a lot of problems in society. And, humans have never had this sort of structure before. Everything's been sort of local prior to this point. You'd have to find the interview to see what he said, because it's more eloquent than I'm like paraphrasing. But he basically said like there's a big risk there that, as you said, the fabric of society will shift a lot because of this. And if you look at the last 30 years on the internet, I think that's pretty true that's happened. Like globalization, the fact we can consume every detail of every piece of news from every corner of the globe now. None of those things are really inherently human. Before, you might have got that news 5 months afterwards, or maybe never at all. But now we get all of it in one go. And then obviously all the information's centralized, all the opinions end up being sort of centralized. It changes everything because all the human contact has been brought together into this gigantic online tribe, where before we just had these small tribes of like 20 or 30 people, and maybe they interacted with other tribes, and we built sort of smaller societies. But people in London wouldn't like regularly communicate like second by second with people in New York. You'd have to send a bloody telegram that would take like weeks to get there. Anyway, you can imagine like now the ramifications of AI is like that, but all of the knowledge used in all of the potential ways in a natural system is a whole new level to that thing. And then on top of that, to your point, you had robots and you had like physical things in the real world. I don't know. It's a scary time, really. Like when I see stuff on X, or I mean, let's use Product Hunt, right? Let's go back to the context of like building. You go to Product Hunt, no one trusts it anymore. No one goes there thinking, oh, all my users are going to be there. Like if I launch on there, great, I'm going to get a bunch of people that are going to download my app, maybe turn into customers. It's just a myth. Like I think 1/3 of the activity on Product Hunt is now bots. So it's this distrust for me that I really think about a lot. It's like, can you trust what you read? And now it's a case of, can you trust what you hear? Can you trust what you see? And then at some point when you've got a robot walking beside you, you're like, who's controlling it? Or, I mean, to some degree, not someone with a remote control, obviously, but who's programmed it? What data set is it using to conduct its decisions? How can those be changed? Who's actually pulling the strings of these things? It is going to be a crazy time, I think.
I mean, yeah, the security implications of that, that you're gonna have a robot that can probably kill you, right, at your house, doing the dishes and whatnot, is scary. But even before we kind of get into that, I think the ramifications of the job loss that's going to occur are kind of much more front of mind for me at this point, because I mean, job loss is such a real thing. We're seeing that in the tech industry right now, right? I can't remember what percentage it was. I think it was more than 30% now of entry-level positions have disappeared. And that just kind of signals companies are okay to leverage AI for a lot of their work. And what does society do when it's I know how let's use the word poverty, when it's in poverty?
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
kind of already know what happens with people in poverty. Crime goes up, anarchy. At the same time, you see more trends in terms of politics, people shifting towards socialism, because socialism kind of tries to fight the super rich. So let's distribute the income, let's have more um, social structure and support for people. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of shifting things around a lot. And yeah, I wonder what socialist America would look like. So
Yeah, I mean, there's a really good point you raise, and I think, yeah, the utopia can only be a utopia if everybody in it is benefiting from it, and
yeah,
it's not being driven by a socialist agenda; it's being driven by a capitalistic one. And the power that accrues with this kind of technology is to a very small few people and not to everybody else, right? So, like those entry level positions are not coming back.
no,
Maybe some of them will in some kind of swing, but generally, I think the trend is away from that. Like, we're all going to have to adjust to this new system, and if the system is too difficult to adjust to, in other words, if it's too good at doing the capitalistic thing too quickly, then it leaves too many people behind. And essentially, what always happens in history is if too many people are left behind, the mass of them is powerful, and you end up with some kind of like unrest or, I don't want to predict what's going to happen there, but it's true that this technology needs to move at the pace that humans want it to move. Like this idea that it should just move as quickly as is humanly possible is silly because, yeah, as you say, if it creates poverty behind it, then, well, what comes out of that is probably some kind of civil war. So at an extreme, I'm not saying that will happen, but at an extreme,
Yeah.
that's what will have to happen because people won't accept not eating. Like no one wants technology progress so much that they don't eat.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's I yeah, and a robot doesn't have to be something that walks around in your kitchen. It could also be a self-driving car. And I think like driving is like one of the biggest labor hires, so to speak. So, let's say we get autonomous vehicles. I think if you experience driving or riding in a car that drives for you, I don't think you want to go back to driving. Like, why would you want to go back to driving? You're always stressed looking at the road, trying to account for every little variations, because you know that if you miss something, you can be in an accident and perish or cause somebody else to perish. So, like, why would you want to get that responsibility back when once you have the
It's true.
alternative?
True,
So
and
yeah,
then you apply that to like the other side of the economy, which is that there's a huge amount of commercial driving happening, where no, the wages are going to be
yes,
higher. There's only a certain amount of time people can be awake and attentive. So I think they're saying that that'll be the first thing, right? It's like the trucking companies and haulage companies that will have autonomous like lorries that can 24/7 be on the road safely. Like, yeah, that will
yeah,
also cause a huge wave of job losses. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's important that this technology, because it can do a lot of cool stuff, but I think we need to see benefits that benefit people directly. Rewriting your LinkedIn post with AI,
yeah,
okay, like maybe you see that as a benefit, but even if it is, it's probably a short term one. The benefit's going to be when you earn more money somehow, or you're more safe in society because of this technology. And yeah, I imagine like you combine robots and AI, maybe you get like small devices in your house that can grow vegetables for you because they can tend to it all day long that you can.
yeah,
And then suddenly actually you're eating some fresh vegetables that, you didn't actually have to make, the robot did. But then the cynic in me thinks the company that deploys that technology makes more money than you do off the vegetables. So it's still a race to the bottom somewhere.
yeah. There has to be an exchange of capital somewhere. And what happens when you
Yeah.
don't have the ability to exchange capital for some services? Like that's the real problem, and something that I we kind of talked about this before we started recording, but politics, right? I have very little faith in politicians doing the right thing, and yet I think it falls on them to make sure that they kind of implement a sort of a buffer so that society can adjust to the new normal or whatever that may look like. But when you're a company or when you're a country, I guess, like let's say the Philippines, who they have a massive population that works in the call center businesses like customer support and stuff like that. Well, AI is going after their jobs. So, what control do they have? Can they just say like, oh, all of you offshore companies, you are not allowed to employ AI in your customer support? No, they can't say that. So and they have no control over anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
There's going to
yeah,
be some really big ramifications to this, and it's going to be weird to see. I feel like it's going to be destabilizing to see how some of these things readjust, and hopefully they do readjust. I mean, that's the point made by most, when you get these real. It's funny because you and I are very pro AI in the first place. This conversation is
yes,
just us exploring the other side of it, of course, because with
exactly.
anything good, there's also bad. Like, there's always some kind of trade off. And I think the short term trade off here is that there's a bunch of people that did something before that provided some kind of
Yeah,
life for themselves that may now need to try way harder and maybe do completely different things. And that's a bad thing. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely going to be some destabilization there. But I think you're right. So at some point, it's the legal system and these big structures that we built to protect. I mean, that's the role of government, essentially, right? The role of government is to create the
yeah,
stability so that everyone can roughly survive and live well in the country. And if the destabilizing effect of AI or any other technology is so big that it challenges that, then essentially that's government's job to try and figure out where the line is. You want
Yeah.
innovation, but you don't want innovation at the cost of everybody starving to death. So anyway, very positive topic. What
Yes.
about on
Yeah.
the software side? Like, do you actually worry about your own job I mean, context, we're both experienced engineers. We've been both doing this for a long time. So we're not talking about entry level engineering. So on that side of the fence, the more experienced engineers, where do you see those roles changing, or your own?
I believe my job has already changed from what it was a couple of years ago, like maybe 3 years ago. It's very different now. It's no longer how to put it. I don't. Am I concerned about my job? I mean, it's gone already. Am I concerned about my new job, which is now I'm more moving towards being a sort of a AI engineer, product engineer, right? No, not really, because if you stay relevant, if you keep on top of tooling and you upskill so that you have that kind of product mindset, you have the uh, all the tools in the toolbox of a um, product manager, I guess. Let's go with that. Then I think you're safe because there are certain things that product managers cannot do with AI because AI is not there and it's not going to be there for some time now. So my job for the moment is safe. And if you're upskilled, um, I think you're going to be safe because again, a PM doesn't have the background in engineering. They can't tell whether a solution is good, whether it's going to scale, whether it's going to create security concerns. Are they going to trust an AI? Well, I'll be concerned if did just blankly trust AI. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I really like the way you put it. Like, my job's already gone, so I'm not concerned about it because it's already gone. But yeah, the new job, yeah, exactly. Like, there's a lot of stuff that we did before that was it was necessary to do it the way we did it, but it's not anymore. There's so many examples of this. Like, no one's going to write assembler anymore, right? Like, we built better tools than assembler, and then we started writing C, and then we built better tools than C, and then we started writing insert favorite programming languages, not C here. But yeah, this it feels to me like this wave challenges so many more things fundamentally. Like, they were all just small step changes. They were like, there's a new way to do the same thing. There is now a new way to do the same thing because the same thing is still building value for people, trying to improve people's lives with the products we build. But the way we go about it, the specifics, have sort of radically changed in a lot of ways. Mainly because the interface has changed, I think. Before, the interface didn't really change. Like, going from assembler to C wasn't that big of a jump. It probably was for some people, but when you really think about it, it's not. There's some new maybe abstractions or indirections, and then actually a lot of the stuff there you still need to be conscious of. Now, it feels like you could make the case that the interface has shifted all the way to just English. I think that's false. I think
Yeah.
you can actually get stuff done with English, for sure. You can sit in front of an LLM and prompt the hell out of it. But that's not really the same interface. That's almost similar of like writing basic assembler before and saying I can code assembler. Well, actually, there's a whole gap here that you've not filled. There's a lot of gaps at the English level now that you have to backfill. And as you say, I think that's experience. It's understanding like we're still building the same kinds of systems, right? The web
Yeah.
didn't go away. The App Store platforms didn't go away. Whatever else that you're building on, the hardware is pretty much still the same. That might change, but even so, it'll still be hardware. It'll still be pretty deterministic stuff. Like a robot, let's say, only has if it does have arms and legs, well then these are known problems.
Yeah.
And from the English side, I think the case is like, okay, the more you can get done just by prompting in English, the better. But the reason we have programming languages in the first place is because that nuance is really complex when you get to the details. So it's always a bridge between the details, as you mentioned, the security implications, robustness, performance, experience, all these really small details when you get into them. If you play the best, whatever the current best like title game is on Steam, there's a lot of detail in that.
Yeah.
AI is not producing that detail. You're not one-shotting
No.
like GTA. You never will, because by the time you think you can one-shot GTA, there'll be something else that's so much better.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's about bridging that gap from like, I can sit up here in English and say, build me this React boilerplate and know that it can one-shot that because those details are so well understood. And I have enough context about what that looks like to prompt it via English. And that
Yeah.
that abstraction from the programming details to English, you can bridge it back with the prompt, with the context. But then there's a lot of problems in there that don't work like that, right? It's an ongoing conversation, and it requires that experience to say, we've had this conversation, we've gone through a planning phase, you've come up with all these ideas. I think they're like, from a high level, correct. You've implemented them, but actually this is completely wrong. And how do you know that? That's still the experience, right? That's still being able to go in and say, and sometimes it's not even a case if it doesn't work. That's the easy
Yeah.
bit of like, this thing doesn't actually even work. It looks like it should have worked based on the prompting, based on the planning, based on the execution steps, blah, blah, blah. They might even be tests that pass. They probably will be.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work. You can see that it doesn't work. I think the
Yeah.
hard bit is that it looks like it does work. And then the real problem is, these things that emerge way down the line, like the data model's wrong, or it's leaking information, it's insecure, or you come to make another change and you've committed to a path that an experienced engineer would never have committed to because they would have seen that you would eventually run into this problem. Yeah, so I think I'm not concerned from that point of view that all of that experience is still relevant. Just that we manifest it differently now. You don't start with all of that stuff. Probably makes more sense to try and leverage the speed you can gain by starting at the high level, building out all of the stuff that you can get quickly, and then figuring out like the bits in between. And overall, you spend a lot less time doing it that way. So
That's I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I think that's exactly how things have changed. And the expectation now, I guess it's also changed where you're expected to, as an engineer, you're expected to deliver a lot more than what you would do before. Like a single engineer can probably deliver an entire feature, maybe an entire app. Whereas before it was like, oh, this is a joint effort. Um, and I think something interesting that's happening as well in the industry is it's become easier than ever to sort of democratize your expertise and knowledge. So I said that again, a PM cannot deliver what an engineer can. So that's why there's still demand for engineers. But what an engineer can do, and maybe even non-technical people can do over time with some feedback from the community, is build an agent with all the right kind of knowledge embedded in it that we're aware of, like how do you structure your code so that it's readable, maintainable, and extendable, right? All these practices, and creating really detailed frameworks for the most popular technology out there. And then, yeah, I think on the basis of that, even non-technical people can create some kind of decent applications. So yeah, I think the more time we have, the more we're gonna see again people sharing their learnings, their knowledge, and encoding that into agents, files that they can, like right now you can pull uh, a plugin for Cloud Code, and that plugin is gonna ship or bring in a lot of tooling and descriptions for how to build with Ruby on Rails, with Next.js, like take your pick, and how to do it in a like to the level that a senior engineer would do, like how they would structure the code, what are they going to look for, and I think that's half the battle already won, which is like structuring and making sure that the code is readable and maintainable, so that when you actually do end up needing engineers to get involved, they can come in and be like, okay, I understand. It's not a hot mess. It's not spaghetti code. It's like, can actually follow through, and I can make the necessary changes to get this to production.
yeah, that's a good point you mentioned there as well. That it I think a big thing with AI now, I see from like more inexperienced engineers, is it doesn't really matter about the code. Like there's this narrative that code doesn't matter anymore. It's just some kind of intermediate layer we can ignore. If that was true, that would probably be a good thing. In the same way that I don't really think about like what the processor's doing when I write high level code, or I don't think about what the electronics are doing. Those are true abstractions, and I sit on top of the
Yeah.
abstraction. It never leaks. I never have to go through it back to the detail again. Maybe we probably have got there with certain classes of problems now. If you're building a React application, you probably don't really ever need to know how React actually works, as long as you've got enough context to say the right things, to use the right, that you have the right taxonomy, you have the right words to say, I want a high level component, and I want the state to be held there, and then I want it to be, make this
Yeah.
API call, and I want it to retry. And if you can say all of those things, then the model is probably going to be able to infer a lot of almost all of what you want. But most applications are not just a React front end, right? Like there's a whole wave of other things going on there, of like jobs and queues and databases and other distributed systems
Yes.
and failure modes and all kinds of other things on top of that, like in terms of observability. And I think it's just impossible to imagine that you're going to do all of that just by prompting your way through it.
No.
But the point you make, I really like, which is I think the way you leverage AI right now is to say that we can do whatever the percent you want to say it is, 90, depends on the problem, but let's call it like 80 to 90% of it you can do with AI. The question is, what's going to be the cost of the 10% you can't do? Because you can produce code more quickly now. You can produce lots of it. And if it's not produced well being in terms of what that 10% requires, then you've only got 90% of any solution. And if that 10% is essential, if it's some kind of like a regulatory requirement, it's a way for you to remain competitive. If it's the core competency in some way, and you can't do it, then, well, you've got 90% of the way there and you haven't actually made it. It's like your plane crashing 10 minutes before landing. Like, it doesn't matter that you actually got 90% of the way there. You've still failed.
Yeah.
And I think, it's this idea of like code maintainability is still really important because, they used to say code's read a lot more times than it's written. That's why, those jokes about regex, write once, read never.
Yeah.
And maybe with AI, those numbers have changed. Like code probably is read by AI a lot more than it's read by humans. But at the point where it's required to be read by humans, that structure is still important. And for me, I think that's actually the most important bit. It's about the understanding of the system. I think an experienced engineer sitting in front of a prompt, engineering a context around a certain problem, and going through those motions as an experienced engineer, knows what's being produced. They can take a glance at the code even and say, okay, I've got a rough idea of what the architecture here is, what the structure is, where things are going to hang off from. And at any point, they've got this comfortability that they can jump in and change things manually. And that's a win-win situation because now you're moving quickly, but you're also not really compromising much. You are going to have to read the code that you didn't write, but that's the same on any team. So that's not actually very different.
Yes.
Probably the code written by the AI is better. So, or at least you don't have to argue with it about style. But for me, it's that if you don't have a concept of that, or maybe even if you do, but you don't value it and you just ignore it, probably you end up with spaghetti code or a system that's actually like architected really poorly. We've had some examples. I remember an example from someone in build mode that was complaining that they got to a certain point with a certain tool and then it just started removing code that wasn't even, no one asked for it to be removed, but just started removing it thinking that was the thing to do. And if you didn't know that was the wrong thing to do, you're going to be in a really bad place at that point.
Yeah, and you see that especially with tools like Lovable and V0 and all these other app builders. And they can get you some distance. That's for sure. They can get you some distance. But as soon as the code base reaches a certain point in size, all of the spaghetti code that the agent did, it starts coming back. And it comes back with revenge. Like one thing that people need to realize is code is not an asset. Code is a liability. Always has been, always will be. As soon as you write something, now you have to maintain it. Now there's some sort of abstract knowledge encoded in code. And if you didn't capture that piece of information, well, good luck. Next time when an AI comes in, it's going to be like, oh, okay, I see some code here, does it matter? Maybe not. I'll just move on. I don't see the importance of this piece of code. And that's why, of course, people have been promoting spec-driven development and things like that. I'm all for that. It's a great way of capturing that knowledge that the code represents. But it's also a lot of work, and you still need to sort of create a graph, a relationship between all these specs that you have in your code base that describe all the work that's happening, and the AI needs to again reference them, stitch them together. And if the code is not helping, which it rarely does with these AI generated apps, you're stuck. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It's architecture is not just something that like emerges. Like you do get emergent architecture, but it won't stay the same way. It'll keep changing, and you actually don't want architecture to look like that because it probably won't stay. You choose an architecture based on constraints, and those constraints probably don't change. But you don't want the AI to not see that and then decide to change the architecture and essentially silently change the constraints that you can now, succeed with or fail with. And yeah, I think that's however you capture it, whether it's specs or whether it's just a conscientiousness, like this idea that like the architecture is decided by someone who understands the problem domain widely, and the AI can slot in there and fix these more contextualized problems. But I think relying on the AI model to hold the entire context forevermore I think it's silly. Like, yeah, it can one shot a little React app, fine.
Yeah.
But even when it can do that, can it continue to one-shot all the changes you're going to make to it afterwards? And what happens when you decide to change out React and you have a part of the stack that's now Svelte, and then for whatever reason you do that, and then now you've got a backend in there as well, and now the backend's using a queue, and maybe there's a different programming language, and you still think it's going to like get all the same context just by looking at the code, because the reasons you made those changes are not there anymore. Like that's not encoded into the context. At a certain point, it's lost. This is the problem with humans too. This is not an AI point. This is just a point of context in general, right? Like I'm sure you've been in teams as well where the reason why some code exists is not clear anymore. And then we have solutions to those problems like decision records and things where we capture the point where we make the decision somewhere. Usually it doesn't really help that much, but the intention is nice. That you capture the decision, you put that record somewhere, and in theory, someone could go and refer to those records to go back and answer questions about why did this thing exist. That context needs to be there for an AI for sure. And I think, as you say, a spec is a version of that. The spec is a version of like, we're going to make this decision for this reason, and this is a high level set of assumptions that we're happy to make. And even then, there'll be future problems of like, in big systems, how many of those specs it's still actually paying attention to, because attention is really what this comes down to. Whether it's AI or humans, we all just eventually lose the attention.
Exactly. Exactly. And something I'm currently experimenting with, and I don't know how it's going to pan out, but I don't know, for whatever reason, event-driven architecture makes a lot of sense for the AI age, because the whole system, if you design it in an event-driven way, should be self-documenting. If you, of course, take the time to make sure that every single event, let's say, handler documents clearly the business logic and why something happening if it's not obvious. But it kind of creates a graph of, okay, well, an event comes in, some work gets done, it publishes these commands or events, and then they get handled this way. And this is something you can easily search, just grabbing repositories for, okay, where's the handler for this? And it's I feel like it's a very like it's an easy way for you to mix the documentation and the code.
I
Nice.
see what you're saying. I've worked in some event systems before, things like CQRS based systems and just even much simpler event based systems where you just it's not like this is a deterministic call to this service or this actor in the system that does this thing, but it's just simply this message goes out and some number of listeners listen to it, and then they themselves in these non-strict systems may even then propagate more events. I hear what you're saying, and I think there's an interesting point. When I think about it, what stands out to me is maybe that, I mean, again, hypothesis, it'd be interesting to see some data
Yeah.
about it, but maybe that does work well with AI, because going back to the point of architecture, everything's the same in an event system. Even the propagated events are just like recursive versions of the things that have happened before. So architecturally, it's the same thing. It's like event happens, the listener gets called, does something, and if event carries like with the payload itself and then some accompanying documentation, I don't know what that would be, but you can, I'm imagining probably what you are of like, it could even be embedded within the code or something, or it could be something bigger. It doesn't really matter. Then the rest of the system is kind of easy. It's like the rest of it's just pipes. It's just
Yeah.
things flowing from pipes and other things flowing through other places. One thing with event systems that I think becomes a big challenge eventually is to get a sense of how the system behaves, because if it depends on how strict this event system is, but if it's, say, inevitably the ones I've seen at least usually end up being quite complicated to understand. Okay, user signs up, there's three things that listens to that event. One of them sends them a confirmation email, one puts the record in the database, blah 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 blah. And then you've got some state being built by the collection of these events, and then eventually you get an event coming from an event. And you end up with these complicated workflows that eventually, as society and the complexity of the real world emerges in this event system, you see flows where it's like event causes two events, that event does this thing over here, that event does this thing. Very natural kind of systems in a way.
Yeah.
But as a human, it's really hard to visualize it. It's really hard to say, what does the system do? Everything, in a way, it's sort of consistent with, in my mind, a bit like AI. It's a bit like a neural network. It's certainly a network anyway. It's not just a three-tier system of like,
Yeah.
UX thing happens, like some API handler happens, and then some data model thing over down here happens. It's not always the same thing. So I wonder whether AI deals with that better than humans does. Maybe it can model that better at some point. I'm not sure. That would be my
Yeah.
concern is like, does the AI get a good idea of how the system actually works versus, in comparison to, say, a simple three-tier system that might be a big blow, a huge monstrosity of a monolithic, just huge number of handlers doing things, but they're all structured in as like A to B to C always. And in this case, it's
Yeah.
like A to B to C to A to B to C to A to B to C, and that's one operation. So I don't know. That's my question, I guess, but who knows?
Well, I think that's exactly why it's so good for AI, because with the right kind of architecture and with the right kind of tooling, you can literally give AI an MCP or a tool to basically query the flows, which is like you're looking at like you start off your request from a particular event point. It's an action of some sort. And because again, events are very well documented, they're really well at self-documenting themselves. It can quickly find that and then say, okay, from this event, like show me the flow essentially. And you can build a tool because again, you can build a DSL or something like so many things you can do for event-driven architecture where you can actually visualize quite easily with a single click. Okay, well, this event, like, where is it used? Like, how does it consume? Like, what does it produce? Where does the chain end when this event is fired? Like, where does it end? Of course, there are complexities there, but I think you can build that kind of tooling and overcome all these uncertainties and end up with a lot of clarity. Yeah, you can end up with a lot of clarity because that's what event-driven architectures are really good at, right? Dealing with complex domains where you have a lot of moving parts and you can have your sagas for distributed transactions and all these things. And again, AI can help build the tooling so that it can actually look up the flow of events and figure out, okay, this is the context.
Yeah, that sounds like a cool experiment. I'd like to see what what. I guess really the value is going to be in the sort of long tail of that experiment. So it's not something you could probably like quickly explore. But it would be really cool to hear from someone that's got an event-based system that's complex, and see whether they feel like AI models are being able to contribute to that existing system better because there's no change in architecture required. At a certain point, initially you might decide, as you say, like sagas and things that you don't think about to begin with, you do eventually, and then there's some small changes. But I guess that's the thing about event systems is like from an architecture point of view, they're very stable. Whereas
Yeah.
you do three tier systems, then you realize you need jobs, and then you're like, okay, now I need to add a different part of the infrastructure that wasn't there
Yeah.
before. And if AI is the thing making that decision, what decision it's going to make is probably, I don't know, it's not clear because there's different ways to solve that problem. But yeah, in the event system, I don't know. I would love to see it. I think it's a good point you raised, though. Maybe event systems are more appropriate for. Well, I think just generally outside of the context of AI, event systems are more appropriate for things that look like lots of different events and where complexity can, you want it to be able to scale and grow with demands that you just can't foresee right now. And I have a few friends that are very big proponents of event systems, and I think they would probably be thinking about the same thing, actually, that AI can probably really help there. Normally, when it's you saying something like this, what that really means is that you're actually already doing it. Are you actually working on an event system with AI at the moment?
I have started shifting our essentially the most complex parts to be event driven, and the complexities, of course, with event systems is how do you know how do you share these events? Like how where do they live? Like what's your event broker? Like what's your queue, right?
Hmm.
These become very very important. Also, what kind of guarantees do you want these queues and brokers and whatnot to give you? Like, do you processed only once, at least once? Like, all this sort of stuff comes in and adds complexity. So I'm trying to shift to it, and I'd love to see. I haven't done that yet, but I'd love to see what's out there in the community. Has there been any development so far? And maybe if there isn't, and there isn't anything that's kind of really outstanding, maybe we can start our own little build mode CQRS framework.
Starter kit, yeah. Maybe it can be like ship fast,
Starter kit,
Mark Blue's
yes.
project, ship fast, but the event version that will, it's aligned with where AI models are going to go in the future. I'll be able to help you more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So maybe something like that. I think.
I want to see it. I'm looking forward to when you make some progress on this thing, and I'm like, okay, show me how it's working. I think it's also kind of interesting to imagine how AI might actually be part of the event flow itself. Like at a certain point with the 3-tier architecture, you've already like boxed yourself into a very specific kind of way of doing things. With events, you could be
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I kind of see what I'm trying to say, I guess, is like with a 3-tier architecture, you could say to an AI model, okay, like observe this system under load, under usage, and tell me where things
Yeah.
could be done better. But really, the answer is going to be the entire architecture needs to be changed for this one thing that can be done better because the architecture is so rigid right now. With CQRS or with any event system, I guess you could have a model in there or an agent in there in the system itself, just
Mhm.
watching the events and saying, kind of like traffic flow, right? It's kind of a similar thing to
Yeah.
like actual cars on roads traffic flow of like, actually we're bottlenecking here quite a bit. Oh, this queue's getting full, but this is the reason it's getting full too soon. And actually, you realize that some handlers producing too much work off the back of something that happens too often. And yeah, I don't know. I like those systems just because they feel more
I,
natural,
the,
more fun to play with.
the beauty of it, the most beautiful part, I think, is exactly that AI can now become a big part of your operations and debugging and everything. Like, how do you run this thing? How do you fix bugs? Because let's say you use event driven, but also you start using event sourcing. Well, now you have everything you need for AI to come in and say, there was a bug here. I need to figure out what happened. And I can replay essentially this set of events that came through and result in the bug. And AI can do that locally on your machine, in a sandbox, wherever you let it run. And also it kind of really lends itself, like this event-driven approach really lends itself to these agentic loops because they're just loops, right? And if you have a event-driven architecture, event sourcing, that's your chat history, right? You just keep it's perfect for all of these things. But again, most importantly, if you back it up with event sourcing, you can get this kind of replayability. And also you
That's a really good
can
point.
change the system. Like that's another beautiful part is you can change the system, replay the events, and you now end up with brand new state with all the fixes, with all the new features, whatever you've had to do. Um, but and I think the entry point into being an effective developer with this kind of architecture is actually quite steep because you have a lot of things to learn and a lot of things to get your head around. But with AI now, it can definitely assist you to get up to speed with the concepts.
Yeah, I'm imagining like, okay, you've got the event source there, and you're able to say to the model, even maybe live, like go backwards and look at the order of these events and tell me like other ways to have gotten there, other ways to have produced the same state with the same events from the source. So you can almost like reprogram the architecture, because you've got both ends of it. You could never do
Yeah,
that from a database, right? You could, because the database is already lost state. It's not, you've not got the whole source of events. But with an event store where everything's sourced, yeah, you're looking at it saying this event happened and then this one did, and the final state is X. But you can see the entire path. So you could then reasonably ask the AI to just explore other ways to produce that path that might be more efficient, that might be
yeah,
faster, or God knows what. Like it reminds me of do you remember Elm, the programming language that
yes,
came out a while ago? Because that was their big selling feature of like, okay, we're just a programming language, but underneath we're actually doing this event
yeah,
sourcing, and in the browser we can say like this bug happened, like we have an error log. This bug happened like 24 hours ago, and you can literally go back. Obviously, you can, what's it called, time travel, back
Yeah.
to that state, and then replay all the events, and it can tell you. It seemed like a good idea. It just never took off. I guess it was competing with JavaScript, and too many people
Yeah.
are they're dug in. You can't get them back out again. But yeah, I'd like to see some more of this stuff. I really like the idea of an agent in there doing something clever. Like I don't know what it could do, but that's what's so exciting about these, you know, current models, these frontier models, is they're so big. They train on so many different things, and certainly like the other architectures, they've seen events architectures before. It's not like event architectures are like a new.
Oh yeah.
They might be slightly less common than simpler architectures are, but there's many of them. So I imagine just without much work at all, just putting an agent into the middle of one of those systems and saying, tell me things about it, or help me figure out ways I can do things better. It'd be really interesting just to see what it could do. I'm
Yeah.
almost tempted to create a demo now, which I'm probably is where you've come at this thing from, of like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, let me create a little event system, let me create a store, and then let me build like some kind of agent that just sits in the middle and just like that proxies every event, looks at, is able to see the source of all the events, and then can just tell me things. That'd be really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. It's I really, really want there to be a framework that does that. I I've mentioned before, at one point I did want to build something like that, because my biggest frustrations with development for the longest time has been the amount of boilerplate we have to deal with. And it's like, I don't care about the boilerplate. I care about the business logic. I've always cared about the business logic. And yeah, basically with a really sound framework, um, what my hypothesis is that if the framework is like out of your way and all you do is focus on business logic, I think that's the most kind of powerful thing, because then the AI can focus on the business logic alone, because it has a plethora of APIs that are readily, like, these things are ready to consume. You have context, you can pass authentication, right? You can, the concept explodes, but if all that is taken care of, like, you can just focus purely on your business logic, and then all of a sudden you don't have to worry too much about being an engineer, or kind of dealing with the boilerplate, dealing with the deployment of these things. If all that is handled for you, you just focus on the business.
Yeah,
Now,
and it reminds me of like the Rails situation. I guess is like there's so many conventions in these frameworks. Rails is probably the best example, where AI models must be really helpful for Rails developers, because there's so much convention over so long now that as long as you're doing the standard Rails path, it must be pretty easy to be like, help me do this thing in Rails, and it's like, yeah, this is the way to do it. But with this event example, it also occurs to me that another benefit would be you as the engineer, when you see like some set of changes produced by an LLM, they're always going to be roughly the same set of changes, right? They're going to be like, we're now firing this event from here and listening over here and listening over there. It might even be able to tell you more at some point if it was a bit smarter. In fact, it would be kind of cool to have some kind of agent here like Claude that at the same time as making the change told you like how the flow's now different.
yeah,
But yeah, I feel like that would be a benefit from the engineering point of view, because just the conversation before we were having about like, the complexity exploding and you not understanding what's happening. A lot of these changes are going to look the same. They're going to be like, yeah, new event,
yeah,
new listeners, new state gets produced because these things get stored in some source somewhere. So maybe it will be it's like, that's one of the things with event systems I always find though, is like, in principle, the really solid architectures, and when people really lean into them, then they get some benefit, but they don't get it straight away, because it's just so much more work to get involved in building a system like this than it is to just be like, Rails, create me a new app, or, Next.js or whatever it is that you use, just build, or a starter kit that you download from somewhere else. But to your point, if there was an event starter kit, then maybe that would be the same experience.
exactly. If there's a starter kit and it again considers all of the key points, then you can just quickly start seeing results. But again, you know, event-driven systems, people need to move away from the idea that things were happening synchronously, because they're not anymore. And so that also needs to be reflected in how the UI works and stuff like that. So, like, there are complexities there, but if you have a starter kit that has considered those and takes care of them, then like there's no problem.
Yeah. And on the asynchronous like UX side of that problem, which should be taken seriously, because that's ultimately the user's experience.
Yeah.
that's no different from anywhere else, I suppose. Whatever the backend is, it's probably asynchronous. So, whether that's a good experience or a bad one is going to be a problem across whichever choice you make on the backend, probably.
Yeah.
Let me shift the conversation to platforms and like future. So we're talking about like engineering and the build side of it. What about the consumer product side of it? Like, because we've had a lot of conversations, obviously as part of Build Mode, we have these conversations all the time. Just finally recording them now. By the way, let me just say at this point, that's like breaking the third wall type thing. This is we intend to probably publish this somewhere because it's a good conversation. If this is a good conversation, let us know somewhere because it'll be really useful for us to know. Because if no one watches it, then well, it's easier to just not record them than it is to record them. But if you actually enjoy it, let us know because then we can do more. Anyway, point I
Yes.
was going to make is we've had this conversation before because you changed my perspective a lot on this idea of like go to where the users are, don't own the platform necessarily. Obviously, it would be better to own the platform. If you offered me, the platform of X and said you could own this as a consequence of building the thing you build in, great. Of course, I would say yes. But practically speaking, if you try to build a platform as part of building some other piece of value you want to build, you're just picking a problem way too big for yourself, and you're almost certainly not going to succeed. Building platforms is difficult. So you changed my perspective on this by suggesting the thing I'm working on at the moment be an extension, a Chrome extension, for example, rather than a whole app. And for a long time, I don't know, I always just thought Chrome extensions seem weak. I want to build a whole app. I want to build a whole ecosystem, a platform. It'll have a web app, a mobile app, blah, 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 blah. But ultimately, I think what's happened for me personally in the last like year or so is I've realized that the amount of effort required to get people to go to a different place than the place that they're already in has now become, it seems to me, a huge barrier. It was always difficult, but a really big barrier now, though. And maybe that's caused by the fact that everyone's building things. There's so much more noise out there. I don't mean to suggest it's all bad. I'm just saying everyone's built something. If you're like, which to-do app should I use? Good luck. Like, because there's a million of them. And it depends just like where the noise hits you as to probably the one you'll choose. And if you're building one, how the hell do you get people to care about it? There's just a million people selling it, probably a better one, a cheaper one, and a faster one. And you're in the middle somewhere being like, me as well. Like, can you use my one? So this idea of like, make people, change their behavior in any way. That's been said in psychology a lot, about don't make people change the way they do things. Help them do what they're already doing. Don't ask them to change, but also don't ask them to move is now what I'm thinking about a lot more is like, how can you be where they are? And actually my perspective on this idea of like Chrome extension or maybe other things, like this is what's really interesting to me is where else is that true? The Chrome extension is almost like super old technology being applied to maybe a shift in the underlying circumstances for people because people just don't want to go elsewhere. If you give them the
Yeah.
thing where they are, maybe it's better. But maybe there's different examples as well. Anyway, this conversation I think is really interesting because with AI changing people's behaviors significantly in pretty much everything they do online at this point, I think it's a really interesting question to say, like, where would you now build? Like, would you still go down the traditional route, build web apps, somehow get traffic there? That's obviously web apps, it's SEO, it's some kind of marketing strategy that gets people to go there, to put their time on this new web page with its own UX and its own problems and all this other stuff. Or would you build somewhere else? Like, I feel like there's a lot of emerging platforms right now that might be worth paying attention to. I'm curious what you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, the question is really good. My thoughts have been shifting all the time around this. Uh, I guess what I'm most aware of at the moment is how ultimately we're talking about consumers here, right? We're not talking about businesses. Businesses, easy, there's a reason why you should go to a site. For consumer, it's entirely different. And the landscape is changing very much. We now have these AI-enabled browsers. And we soon we're going to have even more AI-enabled assistants and stuff like that. So it feels like it makes even more sense to be something that's always there, right? Nowhere where you are on the web. Um, it's one click away for a consumer. It's like a little tiny app, and a Chrome extension represents that, right? It's a little tiny app that lives in your browser and it's accessible anywhere on the internet, no matter where you're surfing. And like building social networks, I think it's insanely difficult, and you can't really approach it without having a very good strategy, a very good value proposition, and a lot of money. backing
Yeah.
you. I think yeah, that's pretty much where social networks stand. But kind of talking about platforms and how you participate in them, it's through apps for consumers at least. I firmly believe that, a lot of people use ChatGPT. Um, I think they came up recently with their own app store. It makes sense because again, people are spending a lot of time, and you want to have apps so that you can help people get something done. In the same way, again, you want to be anywhere where the person is. So you don't change their behavior. They don't have to go to your site. Um, it's a shortcut away. It's a click away to get to you. And now the biggest part is like as a tool, as something that gets some work done. You definitely don't want to feel people like they're doing the work for you. Like they're basically doing the work for the AI or the tool. Um, because yeah, that nobody wants to be like people don't want to be doing more work. They want to be doing less work. Um, they don't want to be how to put it. They don't want to be editing their content or curating it or stuff like that. They just want to create a chaos, a bubble, and let the AI make sense of it. Um, so yeah, I think naturally I can't speak for everybody, but it feels like naturally our minds are a bit chaotic when we're on the internet. We have all these sorts of new interests and curiosities popping up. We're browsing 1 minute YouTube shorts, then TikTok, then whatever the next thing is. We're browsing some article, we're shopping, and now with AI, it's like, okay, I'm in my browser and I want to shop for stuff. So I'm just gonna get the browser to, give it a task. Go find me all of these like dresses for summer, or I'm gonna go to a ball or something else. And while in the meantime the AI is doing that work, I'm gonna entertain myself and get some brain rot going. I don't know. It's
Well, that's a really good point. So maybe the opportunity is actually a dual one. It's either building the infrastructure that helps people do less work quickly and get done what they want to get done, or it's providing really good brain rot because people still have the same amount of time. And if you freed a load of it, then, there's an interesting moral dilemma. Like if you help people do the thing faster that they want to do, what you're also simultaneously helping them do is rot their brain on TikTok. But anyway, let's leave that
yes,
aside. That's their choice.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, you reminded me of. I remember when Gmail first came out, and I was using email prior to Gmail. I think I was using, I don't know, maybe Hotmail or Yahoo,
but now,
and I was using it through Thunderbird. I was using it through an external client. I still use
yeah,
all mail services through Mail.app on macOS now. But I remember distinctly this kind of like moment, and reflecting on it's funny because my mindset's completely changed now. But when Gmail first came out, there was no structure to it. There kind of still isn't, right? Like it's just like all the email just arrives and it's just completely unstructured and like you can just search it. And the idea that you can, you can now tag it and do other things. But when it first came out, it was just like a big list. And the idea was that you don't have to delete it. But back then I was like, I do have to delete it. I only have a certain amount of inbox space. Everyone sort of like managed it in some way. And files were
yeah,
the same things, like photos is another good example of this thing. Like, I would manage those photos carefully because I didn't have infinite space. I remember my very first computer I had, it was so slow, the CPU, that it couldn't decode MP3 in fast enough to play the MP3. So it would just keep stopping, and you could hear it. In fact, you would hear the machine trying to play the next part of this MP3. So eventually, I decoded them to like WAV, like raw
yeah,
audio, and they were like, instead of being 5 MB, they were like 55 MB, and I only had room on the drive for 3 of them. So I'm talking about like going back as far as then, right, where you would totally different constraints. Anyway, point being, Gmail comes out. It seems to me like there's a complete lack of structure whatsoever. And it was Gmail leaning into this idea that people are chaotic. People don't care about this stuff. They receive email and then we help them figure out what email is important. They can just search for it and they can keep all of it. They can just keep all the email. And I remember thinking, there's no way I'd like to do this. Like, this is just not, I've always organized all of this stuff. And now you're telling me to not organize any of it. It doesn't make sense. Same thing happened with photos. But I think we've definitely arrived at a point now where everyone's got too much data, whether it be emails, photos, messages, I mean, messages. The next question is where? Like they're everywhere. You get,
Yeah,
if someone says I've DM'd you, I'm like, where did you DM me? Because
yeah,
there's no point in me trying to check because if I end up picking the correct one in the last set of things I have to try, that's going to be 15 places where this
yeah,
DM might be. So it is interesting now, yeah, that AI is providing this completely new approach of like we can now intelligently help you figure out what you need. Before there was other things, of course, there was filters and searches and things, but now it's even better than that. It could surface information you don't even know you had or needed
yeah,
in that moment based on other context, and that is a complete shift of how people. That shift was already happening, but the shift is now like accelerated even more because we've got this kind of like intelligence at the top of it that enables us to do that even better. So I think that definitely plays into yeah this platform question of like where do we build and how do people interact with the things we use. They probably want to interact with it at the moment it makes sense for them
yeah,
wherever they are, not I have a website I go to do this thing. I mean,
yeah,
I don't want to generalize. Maybe there are cases where, like you say, B2B, yeah, I think that's not quite reached that level. But in theory, if B2C reached that level because of convenience and to save time, well, people in B2B still want to save time and do things conveniently. So, I
yeah.
mean, maybe that also happens there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the natural choice. I think the more AI kind of evolves and the more we get closer to these AI personal assistants, right? There's no difference between a business person want to get something done through their personal assistant and a consumer trying to get something done through personal assistant.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
tasks might be different, but the underlying, I guess, driver is the same, which is something that drives and connects to other tools and tasks, sorry, tools and sources to get some unit of work done.
And I think there as well, you've got the capitalistic kind of part of that, of big companies, especially saying like, we have a certain workforce, we pay them a certain amount of time. If we can save the amount of time that things are done because we find this more convenient way to do it or more efficient way to do it, then that saves us money directly. So, I mean, like always, there's probably a lot more money to capture in the B2B market for these kinds of
Yeah,
conveniences, unless you're talking about the 0 to 1 kind of approach of like, your OpenAI and your ChatGPT SDK is what everyone builds on, and before you know it, you've got essentially like a new Apple App Store. Obviously, there's a lot of value there, but that's all
yeah,
consolidated into one platform. Whereas on the B2B side, I think even smaller tools, in theory, could make good money by providing this opportunity to in some very specific business how to say you've got these 5 tools but here's one, and the one tool figures out which of the 5 tools you need and can maybe even automate it. And actually that's a good point because you mentioned earlier in build mode about this computer vision model. It's going to be really interesting to see where these because vision models, you don't hear much about them at the moment. I heard about them a while ago. I think there was an early one, but then it's all been about image video models at the moment. But yeah, computer vision models, I feel to me like they're going to unlock a lot of this kind of stuff. Where previously, if an enterprise was using 5 different applications and you wanted to try and consolidate some experience into one, well, good luck. You're probably going to have to find a way to integrate with all 5 of them in some coherent, reliable way. Whereas in theory, now you could be like, the literal thing you do, we can do with the vision model, right? We can just
yeah,
exercise exactly the same workflows you do as a person, but we can do it, when you're doing something else, probably faster as well.
yeah. I mean, I think the ultimate kind of, if we're talking about business people, and just business in general, I think the ultimate um, sort of level would be having this marketplace, like you have, I think the App Store on ChatGPT. But let's imagine it was a lot more than that. First, things are secure. You can um, ensure things. People don't have access to the information that they shouldn't, and so on and so forth. So that angle is taken care of. Okay, now all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm a business person. I operate a business. Our marketing team needs something done. Now they can come to the manager of the marketing team or whoever, or they can just do it themselves. They go to this marketplace, or they don't even go to the marketplace. They start chatting with the assistant and say, I need to generate UTM tags for our campaigns, right? I don't have an easy way to do it right now. There are a bunch of tools out there that I've used in the past. They don't exist anymore. They don't do the work, so on and so forth. So you say, I want to generate UTM tags. Here are my requirements. And the AI, well, it can build one for them. It's an easy task. It can build one. in a custom way, or it can look for, I'm just spitballing here, maybe an agent or an app that is purpose built. It has all of the domain knowledge about building one of these things, and it can delegate the work to it, or it can just pull from the App Store again something that, okay, this is the set of things or the set of tools that can do it for you. Which one would you like to use? And now that becomes a part of your suite of business tools. So yeah, I mean, again, the route of it building it for you is really compelling, right? So I know Claude has something like that, something similar where it can build, um, I think it was called artifacts or something like that, where you can give it prompts and it builds this artifact, which is like a little mini app that lives in Claude that you can go to and get kind of business work done. But yeah, basically that's, it feels like that's where we are heading to. So as soon as somebody makes that more convenient and easy, so you don't have to have this insider knowledge on how to get this thing done. I think a lot of tools, a lot of SaaS tools that currently exist are just gonna be like, no, I don't need you anymore. I get this thing done without your bloated feature sets and whatnot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that leads on to the thought that I've been having a lot really, which is SaaS dead? I mean, that's a one of those silly questions that just sounds like extravagant, but I don't know. In a lot of ways, what we're kind of saying is that maybe yes, because well, first of all, people don't want your UX unless it's a game or it's purely an experience-based play. That's different. That's not probably not SaaS anyway, right? You're not selling
No.
software as a service in that case. You're probably selling, I don't know what you call that, experience as a service, something.
Yeah.
There's always going to be room for those kinds of apps, like really nice timers or meditation things or pure games, media entertainment, maybe even learning tools. I think learning tools can
Yeah.
still pull you in and say, we have to give you a lot of different things there. Maybe, I don't know about that last one. But in general, though, this idea that, you go to my URL and do all these things. Well, if that doesn't need to be true, why would people accept it as a thing? And, most users have a pretty bad experience with, especially these days. I think a lot of these AI, vibe coded SaaS, like they're fairly disappointing when you use them. They look nice, the landing page looks nice, but then when you come to use
Yeah.
them, there's a lot of, again, they're not built, not there's a lot of them, not all of them, but there's a lot of them that are built by inexperienced engineers, and you can see it play out in the experience itself, like loading states and things like that just don't work, or you get failures that just don't appear. Anyway, point being, people get burned by it. People already have been burned by it. No one. What do you reckon if you polled 1,000 people and said how much software out of 10 is good software? What do you reckon the number would be?
Oh geez. Maybe two out of 10
Right,
is good.
right.
Yeah.
There's like a complete pessimism in like the fact that like any random piece of software is going to be good. The chance, yeah, 2 out of 10 chance that it's going to be acceptably good. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think the other thing is I think people want new stuff. That's the other thing. Like human nature is about trying new things, right? And at a certain point, the old way is boring, even if it's still effective, even if it's still actually solves your problem. I think just the new thing is cool. So these new platforms, I think, are gonna one of them's gonna stand out. One of them's gonna get like a certain critical mass, and not just because it's new. I think there's also the other element we were just talking about, but I think newness also helps there. For me, if I go to ChatGPT and I can get done what I want to get done by asking it, and even if it provides me with some additional UX there, which is one of these apps that you can now build with the
Yeah.
OpenAI SDK. I can't see anyone's going to do that and think, oh, I really would have preferred to go to someone's external URL and use their SaaS, right?
No, no, I mean, I've been talking about with this idea of, I think like the future of web would be data, pure data. There's no UI, there's no UX. Of course, like you said, there's still room for those unique experiences that people craft for people. But ultimately, I see things just as pure data blobs that a person can decide how do they experience something. Like they can control that. So a website is no longer a website. It doesn't have a UI that somebody designed. It's like here's the data, and the person has come up with their own. like design of how they want to view this data. They adjust the design however they see fit. And yeah, maybe that's how we experience the internet going forward. Of course, like you question yourself, at least I question myself, like, okay, well, um, are we even going to need to do that? Because if we have AI and we can just delegate a task, like just pull me the, I want to browse clothing, right? Pull me the clothing data. I don't want to go to some site, use the clunky filtering or get upsells all the time. No, I just want to look at the items. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of incentive from consumer behavior to do that. Now, obviously, like the lawsuit from Amazon suing Perplexity about their shopping agent or whatever it's called. Yeah, that shows like it's a real concern that these stores are having, which is like you're taking away the ability for me to upsell things to these people by doing the work for them because the AI is not going to look for the here's what the other people are also buying or whatever upsell I'm trying to do. So you're taking away my revenue.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really weird.
It's hard to feel sorry for them though, because I'm like,
No.
welcome to the problem that every single individual creator already faced. Like anyone with a blog that might have had ads on it, and all that information is now, encoded into some weights and is presented directly as answers
Yeah.
in some kind of response to a query in an LLM. But yeah, but the thing is, like Amazon's such a big data set, you can imagine they were the ones that actually lead that. And then they can pay for partnerships for the other smaller stores to bring their stuff in there, and then they're the one that essentially owns this agent, this MCP, however it manifests itself. Where still the experience from a consumer point of view is I'm asking someone to ask, even if someone asks someone to give me this thing. I mean, maybe that's the other thing as well, like the infrastructure that manages to do things like affiliates through agent to agent calls would be quite interesting as well, because I feel like at some point, like you said, it is all about data. It always really has been. And these moats of data that people still have, like Amazon, for example, is a good one. YouTube, YouTube's viewing
Yeah.
statistics is a gold mine in terms of user behavior. Facebook themselves, there's so many examples. They're not going to
Yeah.
give that data up. And they're all big enough that they're not going to be bought by someone else. So they're going to want to sell it some way. And if they can't sell it via some SaaS upsell with a pop-up, because
Yeah.
everyone's coming through some data route now or some agent route, then that commission structure still needs to be in play for it to work.
Yeah.
And advertising, of course, like that's not going to go away. I think there's some rumors that will appear in ChatGPT. I'm sure it will.
I'm sure it will.
They'll have to.
Sooner than we think. Yeah, sooner than we
Yeah.
think. Um, but
Probably
no,
while we were
I
talking,
mean,
it happened.
probably they're probably beta testing it right now. No, I mean it's really weird. It's really weird. Like tech got themselves into this kind of predicament where they're changing the way they make money. Like ads is such a big revenue stream, and so now all of a sudden these LLMs that we build um, are basically eating our lunch. And how do you monetize to the same degree that you have up until now? I think that's the billion-dollar question, I feel like. And maybe they have an answer to it. I don't know. We'll see. But it's yeah. I wonder if that's was why Google never really pursued the transformer innovation that they kind of came up with that happened inside of their
Because they saw that
organization.
one way or the other, it would eat the major thing that they currently make money from. Yeah, it could be. The Google are not stupid, so it does blow my mind that Google put all that stuff out there in 2017 and then stayed just behind the curve for so long. But it's also nice. I don't know about how you feel about this, but it's nice seeing Gemini sort of come back and become a really dominant like frontier model now, because I think if any company wins, I don't know. It's not like Google's a good company necessarily, but it's the OG engineering company and they made the work, so I want them to be in the race, and it's good for everyone anyway. If there's this level of competition, if we're talking about Anthropic, OpenAI, you've got XAI really playing hard now as well, and then Google with all the sort of peripheral companies that are not exactly small on the edges. I think competition's good. But I don't know about you, but I cannot say I've ever seen a time in technology so far where there's been a race to this level of pricing so quickly. Like for the capability that exists within AI, like imagine that it came to us Imagine they'd have kept all this secret since 2017, and now they dropped it, and then they were like, "Well, this costs a fortune." I mean, it still does, I guess. In like, if if you're paying $200 a
Yeah.
month for Claude Code, that's probably the most you've ever paid for anything. $200 a month is huge. I've never heard of that before, except for like Adobe products.
Yeah.
But still, like for most people though, we can build apps now with a capability on the back end that does basically everything. Like most things are probably some kind of LLM wrapper at this point, because why would they not be? You're not going to do half of the things that you could do with it on your own. And yet the cost of that is so low. It's actually insane. I mean, this is why they say it's like maybe a bubble, right? Or it's got bubble characteristics, because how can it be so cheap? And these companies are not actually making profit. Like they're burning an insane amount of money. Something's got to correct at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, the AI race is a lot more than just money. As weird as that sounds, it's everybody's not racing to create the next AI assistant. They're racing to create, um, AGI. They just want to get to AGI, because whoever gets there first believes that they win the cake. And so it's like not a matter of how much does it cost. It's we need to be the first, right? And it's no
True.
longer
Yeah.
an individual company's goal. It's also a like state goal as well. And so I think obviously US is probably the worst in that regard because they just really don't seem to care much about the consequences of whatever they're doing. They're just kind of focusing on like oh okay, this is the race to the moon again, and we gotta be first. Um, and so yeah, there's like very little ethical consideration for what are we doing, what are we developing, and how is it? No, it's like we need to be the first. We gotta pump in. Like there's a lot of free capital because everybody is convinced of this idea that whoever gets there first is going to win the cake, and therefore any amount of money invested right now is justified because the power is out there. Like I'm gonna make a massive win investing in this idea, and that's why we have OpenAI currently slated to record like 18 billion of loss, I think, for this year. I don't know. It's like weird.
Sounds crazy when you say that 18 billion loss, but as you say, if they do produce something that outstrips everybody else in capability, call that AGI, and it's just it's a whole step change in ability, like it was going from pre 2017 to like the initial transformer and stuff. You imagine they win everything, right? The best at everything. But then I don't know. It feels like everyone's sort of in lockstep now. And I wonder, I don't know enough about the AI industry at the research level to make any kind of intelligent guess about this. But my question is it more likely that AGI happens at the same time for everybody? In other words, is everyone sort of marching towards the same goal at the same pace, trying the same things? Or do you feel like one person will crack it and no one else will? Like how much of a leap? Because I feel like the leap has to be very big. I think it requires an entirely different architecture.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, and I think they've learned from the first time, right? Like I'm sure if Google could go back, they probably maybe they wouldn't have published this paper, right? With the hindsight of now of 2025, they might not have published this
Maybe.
paper. They
Yeah,
might
but
have kept it quiet for a bit, got a lead.
they might have done that, or but they don't have control over the researchers. The researchers could
No,
have
true,
gone,
true, true.
so Ilya could have just
But
gone to some other
imagine they
place.
did. Imagine they did, right? You can imagine
Yeah,
if they had some control over that, they might have said, "Well, let's keep this to ourselves." With the hindsight of knowing how much money's on the line for this thing, and
yeah,
going forward, I think whoever it is, and to your point, if it's true researchers that produce AGI, fine. We end up in the same situation again. It comes out in research, everyone goes crazy for it, and we get it from everybody, and then there is no win. There's exactly the same situation we're in now.
I mean, it's so weird. Everybody for a long time, especially early on, they were like equating AI to nuclear weapons. And obviously, what was done back then was somebody shared the technology so that the US is not the only one with the tech at the time. So there's a balance. Um, do you think the same thing is going to happen? I don't know. I don't think so. I think if somebody hits AGI, they would wow, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to think about, I don't want to think the worst of people, but I feel like they would use it to ensure that they stay the winners, right? In
Yeah.
whatever form that is. I wouldn't go as far as to kill the people. I think they might sabotage things. Something like AGI could or should potentially be able to um, data mine the world and find out who are the people that are closest to discovering something and sabotage it. I'm just kind of playing the devil's advocate here, but or kind of some sort of scenario. But yeah, I don't know. It's
It's fun.
too
It's
much
fun to
on the
think
line.
about, and I agree with you though. I think if because and going to the point you just made a minute ago, I think that's another big there's another big tick in that box for that hypothesis, which is there's that okay, they're actually losing 18 billion. They are losing it, right? They need to get it back, and so now they're actually like negatively invested in this thing. They're holding a huge bag. They're all doing it because they're all hoping that they're not going to be the one holding the bag at some point. They're going to be the first to be able to sell it, but if you are the first to sell it, you can't have everyone else have it because then they all get to sell it too, and you're right back at where you started from. So I feel like all the incentives are probably to the point where if it's produced privately, I think it will be kept private for as long as possible. Whether a whistleblower drops it though, that's so interesting. Like I think that could happen.
Yeah.
I don't believe that Zuckerberg's intention with like Llama, for example, is really to democratize AI. I think it's because they were so far behind and they don't want to win in that game anyway that it's to their advantage that they keep it as like the 0 to 1 game. They want to keep it as close to zero as possible, and buys him a lot of attention. It buys him a lot of credibility as well. So I think that's quite strategic. I don't think it's philanthropy, but
No.
there may be someone somewhere that is more philanthropic or actually just like from pure what would you call it? Wants to save everyone from one person having that level of power. In fact, I think there's probably a lot of people that
Um,
might do an Edward Snowden type move and just share this thing.
yeah, I mean, I think if we're to trust Elon, right, he's in the game, in the race because of that. But the thing is, a lot of these CEOs of these companies, like their way of seeing it is like, oh, this is actually, this has a potential of ending civilization or whatever, the human civilization could enable the next civilization, which is like digital or whatever. But the kind of the sentiment there is they're gonna die anyways, so they might as well see it to the end. Like they might as well be there for it. Like I think that I don't want to be saying I'm quoting Killen, but I think that was kind of the along the lines of what he was saying, like why is in the race for AI for AGI, sorry. So, but again, it's like it's one of those sort of monumental changes that I don't I don't have I don't have an impact on it. Maybe my impact or effect that I could have is put pressure on politicians so that they regulate more heavily the AI industry. Like that's maybe the only thing I can change, and maybe I can boycott AI by not spending money with AI companies. I'm not going to do that. I also believe that I will die at some point. So I I do want to live life to the fullest and experience all its ups and downs. And if civilization doesn't, and again, a lot of people are going to be probably like, this guy's a moron. But if civilization doesn't, so be it. I'm here to see it. I'm not going to be the one that does it, but um, yeah,
I don't disagree with you. I think like at the end of the day, there is no purpose to all this thing. This is a very anti-religious viewpoint, really, but there's no purpose to all this thing. We're
yeah,
all just it's as much in our nature to build these things as it might be for trees to exist. We all of this is natural. Like you can't say that the things that that came out of nature are now doing something that's unnatural. It doesn't make sense to me to even say that. So
yeah,
we'll see how it goes. But I think there's a lot of other side points to this conversation of like people need to be protected and civilization. If it's a choice of civilization ends because it was mismanaged versus civilization ends because it was inevitable, those are different. The last one I'm fine with.
yeah,
The first one
yeah.
I'm not fine with. So there's a whole
No,
there's a whole societal part of this conversation for sure. But here's my theory. And I think maybe this actually boils down to the definition of AGI. So you could probably change my mind with a different definition, but my definition of AGI, where it's sort of infinitely capable in most ways that humans are, but at a much bigger scale with more information, and therefore can really do anything we can do. And we can't even really understand how. And at that point, if it really is as intelligent as humans, it can improve by itself. It can, in some sense, reprogram itself and get better, right? It's not static like the current models that we've got are. That right now we've got models that are statistical models, I suppose. We just capture stuff and it can bring in new information, but it can't fundamentally change itself into something else. If AGI could do that, like humans in some sense can, if that's a reasonable definition of AGI, because I don't know what the strict definition is, I don't think we ever get there. I don't think that's possible. And the reason I say that is because I don't think humans are able to understand themselves enough to be able to produce something that's even close to what we can do. And I think current models are really, really impressive. They mimic what we know about the brain, because okay, we've done MRI scans, we understand the neural complexity of the brain and roughly like how it's made up and what happens. And these synthetic systems look very similar to brains, and they clearly produce results that are very similar to brains. But then in many ways they don't. They're not emotional, for example, and any attempt to make them would not be the same as emotion in a human sense. You're never going to get an AI model to just randomly decide to kill a bunch of people, not the current ones. Maybe if you produced AGI, you would. I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of things that go on in a human's brain that I don't think we actually understand at all. And so I think we might produce a better mimic of it than we've currently got, but I don't think it will be the same as human intelligence. So anyway, that's my theory. I think we get models that become really grey. It's kind of like what was it called? Well, it's the Turing test, but there was that particular one that passed it, Lisa or something, or Lisa.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem we get to, is like we get models that look like AGI, but are the AGI or not? And we won't ever really know, I guess, because like we don't know what they're connected to, we don't know what they could potentially have done if they were, or we don't know whether it's simply that they never were able to in the first place. So I don't know. That's my weird theory about AGI is we march towards better models. We probably make incremental improvements. If we make a leap, I think it will look like a leap, but we won't really be able to know whether it is a leap because we can't exactly assess it against our own capabilities at that sort of scale anyway.
Yeah, I mean, first, I do want to separate AGI from superintelligence, right? Superintelligence is that entity that is incredibly intelligent. It compresses all of human knowledge and exceeds it by light years, right? It can basically solve all of the universe's problems technically, right? Given enough energy. Whereas AGI, I see it as um, well. First, I guess the aspects of AGI would be it can actually run for years, right? Not for what was it? The longest session for coding right now that Anthropic was able to achieve was like 32 hours of interrupted coding, right? For me, like an AGI would be able to actually learn from its experiences, be able to retain memory, not forget everything, like be able to actually reason about problems, and carry on, like pick up work from a year ago and can continue with that work later on. I think that those are like the characteristics I would expect. Again, I don't know the actual definition of AGI as well, but that's in my mind, like, okay, that those are the cornerstones of AGI, and this is also part of why we're currently, like, everybody's super focused on creating models that are really good at coding, because their belief is that if we can get really good programming agents, they can actually self-propel the development of AI, because they're really good at writing code. They can write code and reach AGI that way. So that's my definition. I just want to separate those things, like superintelligence and AGI.
I didn't even know about the fact that it was only 32 hours. What is that? An energy limit, a memory size limit or something?
I haven't read into it. I just briefly know that that's how long they were able to have a coding session, the longest coding session they've had so far. But yeah.
But anyway, all this to say, yeah, the race is for AGI. So in the meantime, we all get really, really cheap access to an unbelievable capability. And I don't think I've ever seen that before. It's insane that we get all of this stuff for so cheap. I remember when text-to-speech models first came out, and I was really excited about it as someone that continually tries to build things in the language learning space. And they were really expensive. I remember finding a few that were insanely expensive. And now you just look at the stuff and you're like, it's just, it's not even a business model for them. It's so cheap.
Yeah. But I think we're some time away from this. I don't want to say too long. I think maybe in the next 10 years we're gonna get there. But yeah, I mean, obviously that's going to be a massive unlock for businesses because now you actually have like genuinely workers, right? Workforce that you can use to get stuff done. Pair that with robots, whoa, right? Now
Yeah.
you actually have a sci-fi level droids or android, or I don't know what the definitions of them, but yeah.
It's going to be a crazy decade for sure. And it's interesting because it's part of our career. Like, I don't know, I've been saying this quite a bit recently that we definitely live in the most exciting time. I don't know how you could come up with a different conclusion. You know, all this like, oh, I wish I was born when Zuckerberg made Facebook. Look at all the opportunity there, or when Bezos made Amazon. And if I was there at that time, and you're like, I know for a fact that if I was there at that time, I would not have seen that opportunity. I remember being not the inception of Bitcoin, but very shortly afterwards. And even then, where I could see that from a technology point of view, it was very interesting. I still didn't see, a huge opportunity for it. So I'm historically very bad at seeing these opportunities, and there's no way that back then I'd have been like, let's build Facebook. But it does feel to me now that there's, I don't know, like an order of magnitude more of those kinds of opportunities because it's a disruptive period, right? Any form of disruption creates opportunity because people are moving around, they're doing different things than they used to do. So I feel like maybe innovating like, I don't know, 8 years ago was hard because it was like, well, everyone's doing the same thing. Like, but now, I don't know, I feel like you could do stuff that was very different and everyone's open to this new technology that's changing everything. I mean, on the good side of stuff, on the bad side of stuff, there's definitely a lot of people that are like, no to AI anything, but I think that will change.
I mean, yeah, you kind of left without an option really to either move with it or hope that the government is going to step in as a kind of a natural buffer to slow things down.
Do you think
Yeah.
you'll see like differentiation in art with regards to AI, as in like made by human? Because put it this way, let's say a movie came out right now in the cinema and it was entirely produced by AI. Would you go watch it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really sincerely hope that we get to the point where we can come up, like we can alter the movies and the stories because, I can explore an alternative viewpoint of how these events turned out for any movie. Now, that would be very fascinating. Like I can write
I
my
have a
own
friend.
story.
Yeah, I have a friend that held a position at the BBC actually in the research team, and they played with a lot of this kind of stuff, adaptive, immersive media. Where I think they were trying on audio, so it was radio shows, where based on some stuff that you do, you get a different version of the show. So it's like the show's 60 minutes, but you're only getting 15 minutes of it, and it's that sort of dynamically decided based on some predefined properties that it's looking for. I can't remember the details,
Yeah.
but. That sounded interesting at the time, but then when you imagine the AI world, you're like, there's infinite numbers of extra things that could be done there for sure. I think if you got to the point where you could produce a compelling story as well as the compelling like visual accompaniment of the story, which we call a movie, because this would be equally true in books. If you could create a compelling story, and of course you could definitely write it if you could do that with AI, but then it was also adaptive to something that was, I don't know exactly what, like. I think, again, going back to the convenience point from before, and that people don't want to do work, they want to do less work. If it was like completely dynamic, like it's, some kind of like eye tracking, skin temperature, physical body reaction, and based on kind of how I'm reacting to the movie side of changes and everyone sees a different, that would be cool. That's a new form of media that we've not had before.
Yeah, I mean, I want to see and maybe continue the stories of so many movies I've seen out there. Or I want to recreate a novel into a movie. And I think probably some people are playing around with it, but I think that like one big thing to nail is voice, right? And yeah, I mean, technically you should be able to do that with AI. And it'd be amazing if people had that technology where, you have 11 labs, right? For a while they have been at the forefront of the text-to-speech capabilities, and there you can probably not probably you can definitely um, voice over a story. I actually do that. They actually have an app called 11 Reader. I'm in no way associated with them. I'm not shilling this. I'm just mentioning it as a user. They have an app, and I can just feed it links to blog posts, to any sort of media, like markdown files and stuff like that, and they'll transcribe it for me. Sorry, voice it over for me, and then I can listen to it while I go to sleep or whatever the case might be. I'm out for a walk or something. So, by the way, I tried to build something similar, only to find out that they had launched something like this.
That's the problem. The problem with AI in
yeah,
this world, like whatever you build is probably being built by one of these AI companies.
yeah. But we had a little twist, which was you sent stuff like basically you receive things on your email, and then you can configure those things to get forwarded to the app. And what we'll do is we'll collate the incoming emails and then put together like an episode of your emails. And this was like for newsletters, mainly newsletters and like what do you call them? Yeah, no, they're called newsletters. So yeah, that was great for that. The idea was you can actually listen to your emails while you're exercising or something like that. Instead of like browsing your emails, you get them in the morning, and they'll get to your to a private podcast that you can get on Apple Music. Like this is all built, by the way. It's live at the moment. But anyway, long story short, I think if you can create like a character designer, it would analyze the entire script, and then to come up with, okay, we need voiceovers for these characters, and then this person they impersonated another identity, and so they've changed their voice. Like maybe that's said out in the text, like they got a rough voice or whatever, so that they can hide their identity. And again, it's like, okay, we need to pick or create a derivative of this voice now for this particular scene or set of scenes or chapter. I think if they can get that done, and then they can stitch it together with some video, that would be amazing. I think the voiceover might be a bit more we might already be there, and it might be a little bit more cheaper. The video would be, I think, the real challenge.
Yeah. I think the video models right now like are impressive at some stuff, and then like inconsistent at other things. And I've not seen any really long examples. I think context, because these models are doing the same thing, right? They're trying to maintain context over a certain window, visual context in this case, which basically involves all the real world, like physics and conditions and consistency and all these things. And they're trying to extrapolate all of the like knowledge of that system from seeing other videos, which is actually a really pretty bad way of doing it. Like, even most cameras that produce like say a 1080p video actually have a lot more depth information in that stuff that the AI is not being trained on. It's having to extrapolate that. And maybe there's a way to get there eventually. Maybe these video models, I'm sure they're already using a lot of other information. But I think it's inevitable that they get there at some point, so that'll improve. And then, the next bit is, I suppose it falls into like games and stuff. A lot of game development, requires that same, well, maybe even more consistency. And eventually there will probably be some kind of frontier game model that can produce worlds and produce characters and dynamics and stuff that, in a way, you almost get a game that is like 100 games in one, because it can be completely dynamic to how you play it and what you want from it. It is crazy how, all of this stuff at some point may just become a baseline that's generative, like everything's generative and it's consistently generative. So the bottleneck shifts completely elsewhere, a different form of creativity on top of that generation.
Exactly. I mean, with regards to world generation, we already have some models that can do that. In fact, we've got some models that can keep regenerating as you play the game. They keep regenerating the environment around you, and the game, in fact, gets regenerated. It's a really quirky and weird experience. Of course, I wouldn't definitely not be like, oh, this is production ready or in any way usable. But yeah, it's very basically people are actively researching on that. Yeah, it's like a lot of those things are in motion at the moment.
I feel like they're all sort of like GPT-3 kind of level, or maybe even pre that. But it's just a case of more energy and more training to get them there, because they're solving the same principal problem that the text one, the large language text models solved. They're just doing it with a kind of media that's much bigger and probably encodes a different kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's inevitable that they get there for sure. For me, it's interesting on that same question as like, would I go and watch an AI movie? I mean, out of curiosity, I would. I'm not going to be like, no. I would go with very low expectations, but that's just based on now. That's going to change. That's the same as when I first tried a coding model and I thought, wow, this is actually awful. It's made errors immediately, even though the prompt was very clear. And now that's really quite uncommon. Still happens, and definitely as the context window gets bigger and the nuance within whatever it's produced is wider, it can still happen, but it's way less often than it used to be. And if it's a common problem, I actually have an expectation that it won't screw it up. So I guess video models, world generation models, voice is a good example as well. I think voice has come a long, long way. Like 11 Labs is really impressive. When you clone your own voice, for example, pretty cool. But still, there's an element of it, that top 10, maybe even 5%, where if I heard enough of it, I would know that it's not a human voice. And I think that we're just incredibly good as humans at knowing what's human when it comes to voice. So yeah, but again, there's no reason to assume that they won't be able to like reach that level and solve that last 5%.
Yeah, I think we'll get. I think it won't be too long that we get to a point where it's like indistinct from humans. Yeah.
So back to the build question, what do you think platform-wise, if you were going to build, let's say you were going to build something now and it's not web, obviously it depends on what the thing is, but let's just pick some generic thing that could be built on any platform. You have an area of research you're interested in right now in terms of where you would put that effort. Is it something that seems particularly interesting in terms of where it might evolve and become potentially a big platform? Or would you still stick to web at this point and say, I don't know?
I mean, I kind of hinted at it earlier on in the conversations, but I'm a firm believer of having sort of like the entire ecosystem locked down, because there is a increasing number of developers and people who are not necessarily developers that want to create applications. But we all know, like, there's a dime a dozen of them, and they're pretty bad at getting complex. And so having some sort of framework that takes away most of the decision making for technology out of the AI and says these are decisions that are already made for you. Now the only thing you need to do is work on the business logic and verify that with the user. This kind of event-driven platform that people can build and launch applications from it. It's pretty neat because, again, if you think of the event-driven nature of things, well, you can actually write a test suite, which can be a recording of the person taking certain actions. And now that becomes your test, so that if the AI took the same actions to verify any regressions, it can catch them. But that's a huge project, as I have found out the first time I tried it. But it is a lot easier now to do something like this than it was, when was it? Almost 2 years now since I was considering it. Yeah.
So it sounds like it's there on the back burner for maybe to return to at some point when you feel like it's there. You can't resist it any longer.
We've talked about this before, but there's another platform that I would love to build, which is to do with how do you find high quality products? Because right now it's very depressing when you go out and look for things, because the amount of low quality stuff is just incredible. And yeah, basically, like, can we have something that's like high quality data, high signal, high quality, no basically bad data.
This for the record, we had this conversation for like an hour or so and talked about all these different ways that we could potentially solve this problem. And it's true. I feel like there's so many things. People are building everything now. So the problem is it's just a signal to noise kind of problem, isn't it? We've got very, very low signal now because we've got way more noise. And I don't say noise to imply that it's all bad. There is bad. And there's always probably a disproportionate amount of bad than there is good, because good takes a lot of effort and time and expertise. And but it's just that when that number is 10x or 100, it probably is 100x maybe, or maybe it's more than that, I don't know. But then suddenly maybe it goes from like a needle in a small haystack that you could realistically convince yourself that it's worth occasionally searching for, versus a needle in a gigantic haystack where you don't even bother anymore. And that's kind of sad and worrying, because like people's behavior changes completely. Then it's like, well, there's no point. There's no such thing as a good app, is kind of what people will start to think. But there are good apps out there, and it's just that for them to rise to the top is basically impossible. So it would be really cool to work on something that helps people do this. But I think it has to be, that qualitative approach needs to be based on some kind of trust model that's with people really trying these things. And that information is like, that's like gold, basically. If you had this data set of like, these are the best apps in all these categories, and we know this because hundreds of people have tried them and every alternative, and these ones are the ones that have consistently rose to the top, that data set doesn't exist. And it couldn't, because it would have to be continually up to date. But it would be incredibly useful for sure. Yeah, it would serve so many different ends as well. It would obviously serve the consumption end of like, I want to find the best tool for this thing right now as a user. And a good app, by definition, a good app is something that solves someone's problem. So, helping people find those kind of things is a real good. It's a great service to provide if you could do it well. But of course, the other big thing is like, when you launch products, you can make more products better by giving them, a better place to launch, where if they're not good, they just don't get through. Like, they don't make it because the bar is set by this data set, and you're like, well, you're not at this level, and therefore everyone can see that you're not. And then you sort of help the signal sort of go up slightly and the noise go down slightly, even though there's the same amount of stuff coming into the system at the bottom. Yeah, it would be really cool to work on it, but I feel like that's a really big idea as well.
Well, I'm a big believer that you can build complex ideas starting simple. Like I can't remember what the law was called, but there's a law that somebody coined about, you don't end up with a complex system. The complex system always evolves from simple.
I know the law. I can't remember the name either. There must be a law for forgetting the name of laws as well, which I also don't know. But yeah, it's something to that effect, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Every complex system evolves out of a simpler one, and basically you fail to keep it simple is the problem.
Yeah, exactly. So I've experienced that from firsthand experience, like trying to build out this really complicated system, because let's say you're trying to compete in a market, and the incumbents there are, they have a lot of features that they offer to their customers, and you're like, okay, in order for me to actually be successful in this market, I need to copy every single feature that this incumbent has. And it's like, no, that is definitely not what you should be doing.
Yeah.
That's the last thing you want to do. And that's why it's so, I guess, important to have a good signal to noise ratio on like what does it matter. And I would say it's sort of like a muscle you train to be able to determine that. I'm not saying you would always have the answer to it, but you would have the skills to get to the answer of like what's actually the most important thing in a problem.
Yeah, it's a good point. With all that data, you could also, figure that out some other way, by how people use it. What is it they value the most about that thing? And it would give you a sense of like, in a market, there's these incumbents, but the 70% of it doesn't matter. So there's actually, you can compete on this other 30% that people do actually use. That's where the value is. That hits home, that problem though, because that's basically been my experience recently of building products that You're not sure where to take it. You're trying to find that like the 10% that matters and ignore the 90%. But it's really hard to do that where you've got few users, because sometimes you get, a signal that seems like a signal, but it's not. It's just, in my case, it was like 10 or 12 people saying, this would be really cool if. It's really hard to ignore that. You're 12 people, all saying the same thing, and you're like, okay, this is good feedback. And I also think this might be true. So you go down that route, and you gradually build towards. The thing is, they've said that because that's what they've seen with other things, and then what they're essentially doing, sort of accidentally but also silently, is saying it needs to be more like this other thing, and then you build to be more like the other thing, and then you've lost the advantage. You've built every feature that existed in the incumbents 100 feature set. You've just gradually built each one, and now you're just an imitation. So yeah, I've definitely done that, and I think that is the key thing of knowing how to, what is simple, because simple doesn't mean minimal, right? Simple means that it isn't complex. So you've managed to get rid of all of the stuff out of there that didn't need to be in there in the first place, that like entangled everything together, and you've kept the essence of what matters. I think that's hard. I think that requires insight into the domain in a big way to know what really matters to people solving this problem. And I think that's why, changing the topic slightly from the previous topic, that building for yourself is a really good way to start in solving that problem, because then you've got some intuition of like what the underlying problem actually is. I can't think of anything worse than building in a field that I have no domain experience in, because I don't know how I'd ever be able to make that call of like, this seems like an important problem, but it's actually not.
Yeah, I think sort of you basically explained it very nicely, which is how not knowing what the industry standards are and what is really important in a given industry leaves you at a disadvantage. And that's why I kind of said you need to have the right skill set to have built the right kind of muscle to get to the answer of that, which is usually ends up being talk to people. Now, in many cases, that can actually be circumvented a little bit, and you can talk to AI about this. I know that there are some companies out there that basically they create these kind of focus groups. Yes, they create focus groups with a lot of personas inside of them. They're all AI, and you pose a question to them, and they come back with feedback. And apparently, that's been some people are like, yeah, this is great. This gives us a lot of insights that we would not have been able to get to if we like the cost of the whole practice would be very high if you had created a focus group from scratch with humans, and time consuming. And so they're like, we quickly managed to get to like feedback that was actually useful by using something like this.
I've not heard of that idea before, but it makes a lot of sense to me. I guess the challenge is going to be the personas that you actually create, which are, I suppose, prompted or trained or specialized in some way from a normal frontier model into you are now, I don't know, a middle-aged man using this kind of software to solve this kind of problem, and you care about privacy and you care about whatever it is. Like, the closer you get that represents the underlying person that might actually buy the thing. Because, of course, if this slippage be there, then you get all this qualitative feedback, but it doesn't actually map to the real people that may or may not buy the thing. So I suppose that the value probably that you're going to sell if you build a tool like that is, if you're the guy, building the platform of the focus, the AI-based focus group tool, it's a really cool, I really like it as an idea, for sure. And I think, there's so many personas, right? You could be like persona that's localized to a certain region, certain, I don't know, religious beliefs, conservative, liberal. There's like the broad kind of macro kind of things, and then the very specifics of like can't see very well. And I feel like AI could probably follow those instructions pretty straightforward. Like it would probably know which of those is more important. It could even be told which of those is more important.
Yeah,
that's a cool idea. I like that idea.
Yeah, that's why people kind of came up with them, and I guess, it makes sense. It makes sense because AI technically has been trained on all of that data that has been shared in Reddit and so all sorts of different like blog posts, forums. So theoretically, it should have some sort of insight that can provide, given the persona it needs to.
I have to try that. I have to give it a try and see what it can come up with. I think this is the other thing. If you combine what you're talking about there with the fact that you're already working in a space that you understand to some degree, then you're already a filter for that stuff. So if there is one particular persona that just didn't quite, we're still going to have hallucination or just low quality, or it feels like it's the right persona, but it's not, and it comes out. But you're the final sort of hurdle in that line of filtering where you can say, that's not useful feedback. But maybe it takes out, or hopefully in some way takes out, this bias of people giving you the feedback that they want you to have. Because I think this is the biggest problem. Like, this is the problem I ran into in my latest endeavor, is getting feedback that seems qualitative. It's from the kind of people that already used the first version of the product. They're telling me what they want in the second version. I mean, most people at that point, and I did this as well, you'd be like, okay, well, that's it. I've heard it. I know that. And when there's a consistency among that feedback, you think, okay, I know what to do next. And it was consistent with what I thought as well. So I don't know, it's a really hard problem, but maybe, it's still only 12 people. And what you really want is probably some counter opinions. So you can sit with the two questions that are different and say, okay, which of these is correct? So maybe, these tools is probably a really good way. I mean, nothing beats actually getting to the users themselves, obviously, and asking them, but you can't always start there. You don't always have enough people to do that. So
Exactly. And even if you get to the actual users, you need to have the right questions in mind. You need to phrase them in the right way, because otherwise you might be getting garbage data as well. Just because you're talking to people doesn't mean you're actually getting high quality data. And again, we have this bias towards getting confirmation bias. So
of course,
I've been a victim of that many times. And I just can't help it. I have to be really, really conscious of, like, wait a second, these questions sound like I'm trying to confirm my biases from these people. The
funny thing is, I find that confirmation bias kind of, from the point of view of the person asking the question, actually just a really important skill in simply prompting AI, even if it's a simple prompt. Even more important when that prompt produces some result that stays in context as well, because you don't want that to happen, because you've poisoned your own context then probably. But just these leading questions, like, if you ask in a model, you've got you think you know the answer to a question. I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but you think you know the answer to a question, and so you start with basically like, this is true about this thing, like, right. I think the very fact that you've stated it as it sounds like it's probably true, and the AI is not reasoning in the same way that a human is. So you've basically activated sort of a neural pathway where those words, those tokens, are active, those tokens are in there. I think it's a lot more useful to actually just ask the question as though you're completely dumb, that you're not giving away anything about what your own perspective may be, even if you're fairly sure. So, like, I don't know, capital of New York. Sorry, capital of, what is capital of New York? State capital? Bad example. The capital of the UK, London, right? You could be like, the capital of the UK is London, right? And I feel like this is a silly example because it's not going to actually get that wrong anyway. If I said the capital of the UK is Birmingham, right? It would be like, no, it's not, because it's seen too much of that data. It knows statistically that it can't be true. But when it's those more nuanced things, I think it's much more useful to sort of say, the UK has a capital. What is it? Because you're not given you're not prompting or warming up one side of that pathway or the other side of that pathway. It's going to have to find the answer from somewhere much more neutrally. So I don't know about you, but I try to do that a lot, especially with coding stuff. It's like, I'm saying solve this, essentially I want to do this thing and this thing and this thing. If I don't know what the best way to actually do it is, then I don't want to potentially suggest the best way. I think you can really derail an AI that way.
Oh, 100%. When it comes to coding, like, one of my, like, a big no-no is giving it too much context. This sounds weird and counterintuitive, but that's why plan mode exists. That's why it exists. You literally, like, start off as simple as possible, like, focus on the requirements, and let the AI figure out things. And if you see it missing things in the plan, then you can actually explain, okay, well, actually, you haven't looked at this piece of code that you got to check out because, that's relevant. And you can adjust the plan that way. But basically, for me, too much context is like you have the first run should be with as little context as possible, and then you can enhance the context as you kind of. basically context is king. At the same time, you want to start with no context. At least those are my takeaways with kind of using AI.
Echo the same thing. I think context is king if it's correct, and if you start with a load of stuff at the beginning, you're probably maybe not correct at this point. Because I think what you do is with too much context is you're essentially saying to the model, don't come up with your own conclusions about all this stuff. Here it all is. If you're really sure about that, that's fine. Like, that's what makes a good prompt is like, specifics rather than these hazy ones. But at the same time, these models are really capable, and if you give it a bunch of even if it's the right context, it's just lots of it. It's like all pulling in different directions, and you're just trying to give it as much information as possible. You don't necessarily need it to do that unless you're trying to get a one shot. Okay, but you're probably not. And if you are, that's probably a bad idea. So if you're trying to work through it methodically, it makes more sense to sort of provide context as the model runs into it, because the model might run into something that you don't even know about. And by providing the wrong context to begin with, you've completely prevented that from happening. I picked up a little tip from Matt Pocock that I shared it. We've already talked about this in build mode, but just in the Claude MD file, just saying at the end of every plan mode, give me a list of unresolved questions, and just that additional attempt to make the model think maybe there are unresolved questions makes it usually produce something that didn't come. Not always, but sometimes it produces a few things, which is really helpful. But yeah, exactly. You don't want to produce too much context. You want to plan. And then I think it was you that mentioned this a while ago as well, is taking that plan, for example, and then putting it through a different model where the same memory is not there, therefore the same context is not there. So it starts again from like just the basics of, okay, we've gone from just this code base that exists to a requirement. And in that requirement, it's produced this plan. It's gone through a bunch of questions. You take the plan out and you give it to a different model where none of that memory exists. And because it's a different model, of course, and ask it whether that plan makes sense, and maybe it finds more stuff. But yeah, you want to kind of leave the model open to try and do as much of the core stuff as you can, right? Because otherwise, what's the point in using it? If you know the answer, just go ahead and do it. Just tell it precisely what to do.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's it basically having it's always good to have feedback. That's why we build better products and better things in general when we work as teams with other people, because we get that feedback from them. Because when you're too close to the problem, you see your focus is too narrow, and so you miss out things. And the same thing can be said for the AI as well. And so we have so many great models now. Gemini is really good at providing feedback. Usually I would go with let Claude Sonnet come up with the plan first, and then I might, depending on what kind of workflow I'm using, if I'm in Cursor, I can just switch the model inline and let it use all of the previous context that Claude has produced to evaluate the plan, or save it to a file and then run additional workflows on top of that plan without that context that it would have access to evaluate the plan. And yeah, results are pretty good.
Yeah, this reminds me of a nice anecdote actually from a book. It's a really old one, but I think it kind of plays well into this conversation about AI and context. And it was I can't remember which book it was from, but it's not important. It was to do with this idea of knowledge, and that you can sometimes have too much knowledge to your sort of to your own disadvantage. Again, that sounds very counterintuitive, like you said originally. Like providing all of the context initially seems like the right thing to do. How could it not be? But this anecdote is about airline pilots, and it was some study done with airline pilots, and it was measuring the effectiveness of junior pilots. So junior pilots go into these machines, they have to like go through a series of challenges, and then they get measured like on their effectiveness. And junior pilots usually expected to fail a certain amount of these things and pass a certain amount of them. They took like two experienced pilots, like I think like 30 years plus experience, and they asked them to make a checklist of things that a junior pilot would have to think about to be a better pilot. And then they gave that to these junior pilots and then measured the same tests again. And their performance went up across the board to some degree. I can't remember the numbers, but completely reasonably. Like if you took a junior engineer and you said, look, think about all of these things and make sure you do them, probably the results are going to be better, right? But then the cool thing about this experiment was that they asked the senior pilots to follow their own instructions and not deviate from them under certain circumstances, similar to the junior pilots, and their performance dropped. And the conclusion was that there's a lot of knowledge sort of encoded in in ways that you don't know. It's intuition, right? It's like things that you're not going to actually write down. So I think it's kind of a nice parallel, because when you try and say, okay, well, I have all of the information, you've already failed because you don't. You think you do. And then you write this prompt, this context in one big gigantic thing, trying to capture all the things you know. And you can't see what you don't know, just like these airline pilots couldn't see what they didn't know. They couldn't follow those instructions in certain scenarios. They would have done something different, but they didn't know that until the moment. So I feel like that's a nice parallel for like AI-driven development, is like, give it what you absolutely know that you know, and then take your time and go through the steps one by one, because probably the frontier model is going to bring in things that you don't know about until when it does, and then you say, oh damn, I didn't think about that. Now I can explore that in more detail.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of this idea that you you're polluting the context, you're polluting the solution space with your information. You're basically putting guardrails around what could potentially be a solution to a problem. And in certain cases, it makes sense. And that's kind of why, these AI companies, like Anthropic, for example, I think they clearly state, don't preemptively add stuff in your cloud.md file. Only add things there once you've experienced something. Like, you shouldn't be trying to get ahead of the AI.
Yeah, you're not going to win.
Use it, find out what the failure modes are, and then put guardrails in your cloud.md file to prevent that from happening again, not the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, what's the point in using it? If you're going to constrain it into doing these very specific tasks, then, maybe the point there is just to go a bit faster. Maybe there are cases where you do want to do that, but yeah, the ingenuity of it is there if you don't constrain it too much. Yeah, good point. All right, we're at like I think close to 2 hours now. I mean, we need to be careful. People are going to think this is like the Lex Friedman show. We only have to add a few more. This has been a cool conversation, though.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Maybe we can release it into 2 parts.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know. I'll try and put it together maybe and see if it's under 2 hours, we can put it together and then see if people like the overall theme, because I think we covered a lot of stuff there. So yeah, let us know if you like this conversation and you want us to do more. Ivan and I have these conversations anyway, so really it's just a case of, do you want to listen to the future ones that we inevitably will have about probably a lot of the same topics?
Yeah, and I guess if you have any particular questions you'd like us to, or topics you'd like us to cover, throw them in. No guarantee we'll actually do that, but we will definitely take it into consideration.
Yeah, especially the hard questions. If you want to throw some really hard questions, I mean, those are always the best discussions, right? So feel free. There's so many topics we haven't covered that we've talked about in the past as well. So specific things that we're working on, of course, and outside of technology space, travel, life. Of course, we had the big political discussion, but we didn't record that bit to save you from that.
It's better to stay off politics as much as we can.
Yeah. This will not be a political conversation. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, nice. Well, I guess we'll do this again in a week or two, and hopefully record the next one. So
sounds good.
Cool. Looking forward to it. All right.
Likewise.